Good day, everyone. And as promised, here is your oral communication review video part 1. And this will cover lessons 1 to 3 of oral communication. Now, to begin, these are your topics which will be covered for your first quarterly examination. And the following are 1. The communication elements. 2 would be the models of communication. 3, you have barriers of communication. 4 is intercultural communication. 5, the functions of communication. 6, verbal and nonverbal communication. 7, you have the types and forms of oral texts. 8, the speech contexts. And finally, we have speech styles. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, now to kick off this review video, let's begin with lesson 1, which covers the definition and elements of communication. Now, in this lesson, we are going to talk about two things. First would be the definition of communication as a process, and second will be the elements of communication. So what is communication as a process? Communication comes from the terms communis and communicare, which both imply a sense of sharing. And what do people share in the communication process? Well, since communication is also understood as the transmission of a message through the use of words, symbols, etc., according to Berlo and Steiner in 1964, then it could be considered that communication is the sharing of a common understanding of a message, okay? And this is shared between or among the interlocutors. So what is inside the process of communication, and what are the components? Well, these are the elements of communication. We have first the sender, second would be the message, third is the channel, fourth is the receiver, and fifth we have feedback. Now, to explain each element, the sender is also called as the source or the encoder of the message. Now, this is the person responsible for inputting the message for the receiver. Okay, so this is where the communication process begins. And this sender is going to encode a certain message, which is also understood as the content or the purpose of the communication itself. Now, people communicate because there is a message that they want to impart to other people. And this message may come in the form of verbal or non-verbal messages. Okay, so how is this message sent out? Well, this message is sent out through the use of different channels. And a channel is understood as the means by which the message is delivered or sent to the receivers. And this is usually channeled through the senses, okay, your 5 senses. But more specifically, we have the 3 major senses: the visual sense, the auditory, and the tactile. Now, the 4th type of channel is the one where you combine 2 or probably all of the different types of channels. Okay, so once the message is sent out through the channel, this is now received by the receiver, where the message is usually terminated. Why is it terminated? Because the receiver is also the destination or the decoder of the message. This is the reason, or this is the person who accepts the message and interprets the message based on what the sender's message was. Now, from the receiver, he or she may choose to send a return message to the sender. Okay, they can send a return message, or they may choose not to. But once they send a return message, this return message is now called the feedback. Okay, so this is the message coming from the receiver back to the sender. Now, this element is also very important because it is only through the feedback that the sender will know whether the original message was received and understood properly by the receiver. So, no feedback, it would probably mean that the sender will be left hanging, okay, or wondering if the original message was received or understood properly. So to summarize all of these concepts, communication is meant for sharing, and we share a common understanding or a common knowledge, and we share the message that was sent by other people to us, and then from us to other people. And this is done through the transmission of certain messages. Communication may also exist as a verbal or non-verbal form, and this communication process is broken down into 5 main elements, namely the sender, the message, the channel, the receiver, and the feedback. Okay, so that completes lesson number 1. We now proceed to lesson number 2, which talks about the different models of communication. Now, if in the previous lesson we talked about the different components of communication, we are now going to structure them and see if we can build certain models which will somehow give us an overview as to how the communication process proceeds between and among people. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about 2 things again. First would be the definition of communication model, and second, we are going to discuss the different types of communication models. So let's begin with the definition. What are communication models? Communication models are illustrations that show how the process of communication is usually carried out between and among people. So we are looking at a process, so a step-by-step procedure. And there have been different types of models which have been developed all throughout the centuries. And there are 3 main groups. First would be the linear model, second would be the interactive model, and third is the transactional model. So the first model, the linear model, is what is commonly known as the one-sided type of communication because it is merely focused on the sending of the message from sender to receiver. So it's just a one-sided transmission. And in a sense, it could be said that the sender speaks and the audience listens. Okay, so there is no feedback. And to give you an illustration of that one, here is a picture that clearly illustrates that there is one-sided communication. From the sender, there is the message which is now received by the receiver, but no return message is visible. So the next one is when there is a return message, and this is what we normally call as the interactive model. And this is the 2-way process of communication. So from the sender to the receiver, and from the receiver back to the sender. And this is done through the alternating roles of interlocutors, which means while one person is talking, the other one is listening. And then once their turn has ended, the other person now talks while the original sender now listens. So to give you an illustration of that particular model, here is a picture. So as you can see, a message is sent from the sender to the receiver, and then the receiver now provides feedback to the sender. So there is now the alternating role of the interlocutors or the speakers, from sender to receiver, and then from receiver back to the sender. Now the last general model would be the transactional model. And if in the interactive model there is the alternating role of speakers, the transactional model is different because they don't take turns in speaking. Instead, they have simultaneous exchanges between themselves or among themselves. The interlocutors are both senders and receivers at the same time. Now, how is this illustrated? Now, let me give you a picture. This is a clear illustration of what the transactional model looks like, or how it looks like. The original sender sends a message which the receiver receives, but at the same time, this receiver is also sending a message back to the sender, which means there is no clear role as to who is, or there is no specific time that states that this person is now the sender and this person is the receiver, because they are both senders and receivers simultaneously. And that is the transactional model. Okay, so to give you examples of certain linear models, okay, these are specific examples of models which fall under the category of the linear structure. And first, we have Aristotle's model, and second, we have Lasswell's model. So to expound, Aristotle's model is linear in nature, and I believe this is the earliest form of communication model. Okay, this is the first, and it focused on two things: the speaker and the occasion. Okay, so to give you an idea as to what Aristotle focused on in his model of communication, he said that a good speech has three components, and three components only. One is the ethos, or the credibility of the speaker. Second is the pathos, or the appeal of the speaker to the audience. And lastly is logos, or logic. The speech or the message has to be logical. And this clearly shows that there is no emphasis on the receiver of the message, and there is no emphasis on the feedback, because it is just from sender being credible, appealing to, or being able to appeal to his or her audience, and then lastly is to give a message that is logical. To give you an idea on or about the understanding of people regarding the Aristotelian model of communication, this is the illustration. The speaker creates a speech which contains the message meant for a certain occasion, delivered to an audience, which will then give you an effect. But again, Aristotle focused on the speaker and the occasion, not much on the audience or the effect. Okay, another linear model or another linear type of communication model is Lasswell's model, and this resembles the model of Aristotle, but with a different focus. If Aristotle focused on the speaker and the occasion, Lasswell focused mainly on the intended effect of the speech. So Lasswell did not put a premium on the message or the speaker or the occasion individually. Instead, Lasswell believed that in order for the intended effect to be achieved, then the other elements must be aligned towards the achievement of that effect. So, to give you an idea, this is how it looks like. As you can see, the effect is at the end of the illustration. And for him, the only way for this effect to be achieved is if the communicator is credible, the message is direct and is effective, the channel that is selected is also appropriate to the audience who will be watching or listening to the speaker. And it is only when they are in sync with each other that we are able to achieve the desired effect. Okay, now moving on to interactive models, there are two very prominent interactive models in existence. First would be Shannon and Weaver's model, and the second one is Schramm's model of communication. Now for Shannon and Weaver, their model is interactive as it emphasizes on the exchange of the roles between speaker and receiver. However, there is one inclusion, and this is the inclusion of noise. Now, they believe that the message that is being received by the receiver will be greatly affected by the presence of noise. So in order for us to retain the original message, the communicative activity must be free from any type of noise, be it intrinsic or extrinsic. And as you can see, or in the next slide, you will be seeing that there is already feedback in their model, which was non-existent in Aristotle and Lasswell's models. And again, the communication process, according to Shannon and Weaver, is greatly affected by the presence of noise. Okay, so as you can see in the model, there is now feedback. So from the sender, he or she encodes a message and is transmitted through a particular channel. But when there is noise, then a certain disruption in the receiving of the message may occur, which can alter the impact or the meaning of the original message. And this will be verified once the decoder or the receiver sends the feedback to the sender. So you can think of an example like in the classroom when your teacher is giving a lecture on a particular topic but your classmates are noisy. He or she will know if you have understood the lesson or if the original message was retained by asking for feedback. They may ask you questions and your answers might give them the idea as to whether or not you have understood the original message or not. Okay, next we have Wilbur-Schramm's model, and this is also interactive in nature because there is still an exchange between the speakers. However, the focus is no longer on noise but in the field of experience. And to Schramm, communication happens if and only if the fields of experience of speaker A and speaker B overlap at some point. And this overlap means that they have common ground between them. So to give you an idea how it looks like, this is Wilbur-Schramm's model. So the field of experience of the source and the field of experience of the destination or the receiver, if it overlaps, then communication or successful communication can occur. But if it does not overlap or if they don't overlap, then communication may fail. And that could lead to miscommunication. So the last type of model that we're going to discuss is more like a hybrid. Okay, this is Berlo's model or the SMCR model of communication. Now, to Berlo, communication is a complex process of aligning the different factors in communication. This is somehow related to Lasswell's model, but with a different twist because there are more factors involved in Berlo's model. Even a speaker's culture is taken into consideration, the noise present in the surroundings, the kind of people that you are talking to, all of these things are being taken into consideration when communicating with other people. Now, if you might ask, what are examples of transactional models? Well, to give you an illustration of a transactional model, you can imagine combining two different types of models or communication models which we have previously discussed. For example, when you combine the process of the SMCR model of Berlo and the field of experience by Wilbur Schramm, then you might get a transactional model. Or if you go for the combination of Schramm's model and the model of Shannon and Weaver, and there is simultaneous communication which leads to noise, then you have yourselves a transactional model. So this is more likely a combination of the different types of models that we have discussed. Okay, now those are the components of lesson 2. Now to proceed to lesson 3, which talks about the barriers of communication and touches on intercultural communication as well, we will be discussing the following things. First will be the definition of the different types of barriers of communication, and second, we will go to the different types of barriers. And then lastly, we will also discuss the concepts of intercultural communication. So to begin, what are barriers? Okay, what is our understanding of a barrier? Now, when we talk about a communicative barrier, these are factors which may impede the communication process. And by impede, we mean that there might be a certain disruption or it might negatively affect the communication process as a whole. So if you see a barrier, then most likely it's going to stop you from proceeding. So in the context of communication, if there are barriers to communication, then the message or the original message of the sender might not reach the the receivers, and miscommunication can occur. So what are the different types of barriers? Now, there are two major types, and these are the intrinsic and the extrinsic barrier. These are pretty much self-explanatory, as we understood intrinsic barriers to be barriers which are found within the interlocutors or the speakers. This could be an emotional factor. This could mean lack of knowledge. Okay, these are the things that occur within the speakers, and these are the factors which can hinder a person from communicating successfully with other people when these intrinsic barriers are present. Now, on the other hand, extrinsic barriers are factors which are found within the surroundings of the interlocutor. So it is no longer found within the speaker. Instead, it is found in his or her environment. Imagine, if you will, talking to another person on the phone, but the public utility vehicle where you are riding is blasting out loud music. So there is now a difficulty in understanding the other person on the line because your immediate surrounding is not very conducive to a conversation. So, since communication happens between people, and this is probably a very known fact, it could also be said that communication can happen not only between people of the same racial background, but among people of different races or social groups, and that is what we understand as intercultural communication. So what is it about intercultural communication that is very important? Well, when we are talking to people who belong to different or to another group, to a different ethnicity or a different nationality, then there are certain things that we have to observe, and there are certain things that we have to respect in terms of communicating with other people, because there might be communicative taboos, or like a don't do list of things that are to be taken into consideration when engaging in a conversation, say with a foreigner. Okay, so for example, when you talk to a Japanese person, most likely their initial reaction would be to bow, and so this is one aspect of their communication or their communicative paradigm or their communicative culture that we have to respect. If a Japanese person bows, then we have to bow as well. This is just one of the examples of intercultural communication. There are others out there. There are other practices which we have to know and to be able to observe before we talk to people of other races or other social groups. It has to be observed that these races, or when we talk about intercultural communication, we don't only mean people from a different country or from a different ethnicity, but it can also include people from different social groups. And there are terms which should not be used when talking to these social groups, as these terms may be considered to be derogatory. Okay, so that being said, I believe that's the end of the first part of your oral communication review video. I will see you in the next video, where we are going to talk about lessons 4 until 6. So, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.